Welcome to Transforming and Thriving
with best friends Brooke, Stacy, and Neelia.
Podcast dedicated to women sharing their inspirational stories.
Hey there, everyone. We have some exciting news to share. We're launching a new philanthropy initiative to support local organizations. Our first partner is the Wellness and Prevention Center in South Orange County, California, which provides crucial mental health services for youth and families. They've just opened an alcove space in San Juan Capistrano, offering young people ages 12 to 25 a welcoming space to access mental and physical health support, navigate substance abuse, connect with peers, and get help with school or jobs. To kick things off, we'll be matching up to $1,000 in listener donations. Your support will directly impact young lives by sustaining safe, empowering spaces like Alcove. Check the link in our show notes to donate and follow at WPCOC on Instagram to learn more. You can also explore Alcove's resources at alcove.org. That's ALLCOVE.org. Let's come together and support these vital programs for our youth.
Hey there, everyone. We are so excited to be here for another episode. I'm Neelia.
And I'm Brooke. I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by a truly unique individual, Isabel Witter. Isabel is a gifted artist working within the bereavement industry, bringing a unique perspective to difficult topics. With a strong academic background and special interest in psychology and philosophy, she recently co-authored a book with our other co-host, Stacy's brother-in-law, geared toward adolescents that provides a framework for living intentionally.
Thank you so much for being here, Isabel. So can I ask, where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining you from Huntington Beach, California.
Oh, very nice. Well, we're so glad to have you.
I'm really happy and grateful to be here and to share a little bit about some of the transformations that I'm currently experiencing and have experienced, and I hope that it resonates with somebody who's listening and is helpful.
Well, we appreciate you as well. And so could you dive further? What was that major transition or life event looking back? Is there a moment or experience that kind of divides your life into chapters? Would you mind elaborating and sharing that transition?
Yeah, for as long as I can remember, I've seen the world through the lens of a very intense fear, and I haven't ever felt safe in this was a recent realization, is that I've never felt safe in this world with any person at any place or at any time. There's always been this hypervigilance and a sort of certainty of impending doom. I kind of feel at times like I've lived my life so far as like a rabbit, just in a dark and scary place, not trusting that the world is a safe place that I am supposed to belong in. So realizing that has been interesting because I always felt that my fear was protecting me. And I've just come to the conclusion that it's really been limiting me in a lot of ways and imprisoning me. So that's been interesting to face.
Wow. Do you mind sharing, was there a pivotal moment in, maybe growing up or a trauma that you experienced that kind of evoked or elicited this fear response in you?
I can recall I had what I would call an existential crisis at a pretty young age because I didn't have a very strongly religious background. So I didn't have an anchor of certainty surrounding what happens when you're no longer being anymore. And I remember I was around 9 years old and I was in the backseat of my dad's car, and I was looking at all the other cars that were passing by, and I started thinking about how every person was living a life that was just as complex and rich and real as my life, and that I could never experience another person's life. And when I was thinking about my life and my experience and how it's all I know, I started to think about the inevitable, which is death, and that eventually there's going to be a time where I am no longer existing. And without having any anchor to answer that unanswerable question, I sort of spiraled into thinking about something that is unfathomable, which is non being. And I think even though I dealt with fear prior to that, I think that moment of crisis really caused me to cling to what I knew was temporary. And to me, I think fear is and anxiety is trying to exert control over something that by nature is out of my control. And even if it's an illusion, it's it feels safer to be constantly cautious and to be mentally prepared for the worst case scenario. So I think that that really started the pathways of my thinking that have since been deeply ingrained.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear that you've had to go through that, especially at such a young age. Did you feel comfortable? You said you were driving in the car with your father. Did you feel comfortable like expressing that to him when you were 9 years old?
No, I don't believe that I shared that with him. My dad and I have a sort of complicated relationship, and I think talking about sort of what has led to that default operating system, I think part of that was the relationship between my mom and my dad, who didn't have a very loving relationship, and my dad was never somebody I felt super safe being open with. So I don't recall sharing that with him, and it was just something I sort of spiraled spiraled about and kept to myself, and then continued living with that default operating system.
Gosh, that must have been really difficult to go through all that you were going through at that time so internally and not have somebody, especially within your family, to go to for support and help. I'm curious, do you feel like, or did this have an impact on your relationships and how you viewed them?
Yeah, I think it was having this way of thinking and seeing the world. As I said, I thought it was keeping me safe, but it's really shaped who I am spiritually, interpersonally, and especially, I think, romantically. For me, it's led to accepting abuse and poor treatment just because of an inability to set boundaries or a fear of rejection. And also, I think a genuine fear of the burden of having my own agency and trying to live my own life. I think that I used other people and their problems and trying to help them heal as almost a form of escapism to avoid the weight of having to live my own life. And recently, I just got out of a 4-year long relationship, and that was an incredibly scary thing for me to do. But I think taking that step, even though I hadn't necessarily come to these conclusions about my perception of the world, taking that first step of choosing myself and doing something deeply uncomfortable and scary, which was being alone for the first time since I was 16 and living alone, doing that has been sort of the catalyst for unpacking all of these pathways in my brain that are so deeply ingrained and how it's actually been impacting me rather than the stories that I've told myself about how fear is keeping me safe.
Yeah, it's amazing how the thoughts and stories we tell ourselves become our beliefs. And then our brain like looks for evidence to support that, right? Like we're just constantly getting confirmation because we're searching for those things that are going to feed that fear. You mentioned kind of multiple layers of how this fear, how it kind of limited you. So I was envisioning it kind of narrowed your capacity for life, right? And so Could you elaborate a little bit more about the things that were limiting for you when you were kind of going through this more fear place, coming from a fear place?
Absolutely. I feel like in a more concrete sense, it has limited what I do with my time, and I'm somebody who loves nature. I love being outside. I love camping and hiking and things like that. I love to travel and experience new things, but fear has really limited my ability to do those things just because I've had a certainty that something terrible is going to happen. So it's prevented me from doing the things that I love and enjoy for a long time just because of that fear and that false certainty. And then in a more in a less concrete way, I think it's limited my ability to be an authentic person in my interpersonal relationships, because I've I would describe myself as a people pleaser, and I'm trying to confront that, but I think it really stems from fear. It stems from a fear of rejection, like a fear of being seen for who I really am, and then, being rejected because of that. And then also a fear of a genuine fear of saying no and making somebody feel uncomfortable or making somebody else feel rejected and that being a potentially unsafe situation for me. I've had to sit with the concept of saying no to me is something that is terrifying. And I think that might sound silly to some people, but something that I have to really practice and work on, setting boundaries and saying no and not shaping myself into what I think somebody else needs. And that applies to professional relationships, friendships, romantic relationships. It almost feels like it's caused me to be performative. And then due to that, I've felt misunderstood by everyone and very isolated and lonely on the inside. But I haven't allowed myself to be seen because of that fear. And so I can't expect to be understood if I'm not allowing myself to be myself. So that's also an ongoing practice of authenticity and genuineness in the connections and conversations that I'm having every day.
I'd love to hear more about you mentioned rewiring your brain. Can you share a little more about what that looks like?
Yeah, it's something that takes repeated practice over time. And rather than like a sudden change or a mindset shift, I think it's a commitment every day to be grounded and con- trying to surrender, essentially. I consider it a practice in surrender. And what I do is meditation has been really helpful for me, and breath work for just calming my nervous system. And then affirmations. Every morning, I try to tell myself that I am safe and that I do belong in this world, and trying to see my fear not as an enemy, but as an opportunity. Every time it arises, it's an opportunity for me to practice surrender until it becomes something that is easier and easier. And trying to be patient with myself and kind to my fear because I recognize that it has developed as a way to keep me safe. Whether or not that was misguided is irrelevant. It's been to try to keep me safe, and I'm now realizing that it wasn't keeping me safe, but it just takes some time to override that.
Totally makes sense. Yeah, like what Brooke was saying, when you tell yourself over and over the same story, it somehow becomes true. And, like in your scenario, you felt unsafe. You kept on telling yourself you're unsafe. Did you find that there was tools like when you started the process of like meditation and kind of guiding yourself through this process and rewiring your brain, were there tools that you found elsewhere or like Are there tools out there that you seeked or found that might have been helpful in this process for you?
Yeah, I did a lot of reading, specifically since I just left relationship and I'm learning to how to kind of be on my own. I read a lot of books that discuss that tendency to when you have low self-worth or you have that fear of being rejected or not lovable or all those things. I read All About Love by Bell Hooks, and I read another book called Women Who Love Too Much by Robin Norwood. And those were very helpful for me in just recognizing some of my own patterns in specifically in romantic relationships. But otherwise, it really took some time. I would suggest taking time to reflect on the root of the fear and figuring out how it has impacted you in your life and kind of unpacking that. Something that's been helpful for me has been guided meditations that can be found on YouTube, and specifically non-dualism has been very helpful for me in with the idea of surrendering and trusting the universe, recognizing that the end of fear is not the end of caution, but the beginning of freedom. That's something that I'm really trying to recognize and implement. So, some helpful teachers in that regard with non dualism and the guided meditations have been Rupert Spira, has been a big one.
Do you mind sharing what non-dualism really means? And just overall, if you could kind of summarize what you feel this experience has taught you, and because we believe that we're always in process of transforming, what it continues to teach you, I guess.
Yeah, so non dualism is basically the idea that there is no separate impermanent self. The idea that we are all separate human beings that are kind of contained within our bodies and our minds, subject to just impermanence, that is kind of an illusion. And what is really real and permanent is beyond what we can sense with our bodies and beyond our thoughts. Rupert Spira, who I mentioned, he gives the analogy that the sky is not the clouds. The sky is not the weather. Just like you are not your thoughts. You are not your body. You do not end when your thoughts and your body end. What you are is something that is beyond the biological and beyond the neurological. And the way he describes that, that resonated with me, is that biologically, there's nothing that is the same about you from the time that you were 5 years old or 10 years old. Your body goes through all these changes, and your cells are replaced and renewed, and all of those processes. So there's not one thing that we can point to where we can say that's where I exist. That's where I am or my consciousness is. And obviously, we can have thoughts. We're not having the same thoughts either that we had when we were 13, 14 to now. Your thoughts are always changing and can be inaccurate and all of that. So we're not our thoughts, and we're also not our bodies. So it's the question of what are we beyond that? And I find the idea of non-dualism to be quite comforting and helpful for me when I'm leaning into the idea of surrender. It's an Eastern philosophy connected with Hinduism and Buddhism and those kinds of traditions.
I was just thinking that, and I'm so glad that Brooke asked that question because I was just about to Google it, and I because I am totally ignorant about that subject. But no, I appreciate you sharing. And also, we will include your books that you had shared in our show notes, in addition to, well, actually, all three of them, because you mentioned three. So we'll include those in our show notes for anyone that wants to read more about it and do some more research. I know I will. And I also know that you have written a book, which is pretty amazing. Can you share what your book, The Hum, is about?
Yeah, so I got the opportunity to co-author the Hum, and it's it's really a framework for adolescents to I think I think it can be useful to anyone, but it's targeted for adolescents. The purpose of it is to try and teach people how to live life and how to take control over their life and their reality rather than letting life sort of happen to them, and what that looks like and what it looks like to examine yourself and figure out what does it mean to be me in this world and how do I live intentionally? How do I make decisions that are true to my own desires? And how do I make sure that I'm following the compass of my aligned self as I go through life? So it was such a privilege to be able to help write it. And yeah, I feel really proud of the work that was put into it. So,
Well, congratulations. That's pretty amazing. Can you tell me, well, one, I want to be able to share how people can connect with you and reach out to you with, if you don't mind, with more questions. So we'll add your book information that you have available for sale on Amazon. And then your Instagram handle, your busy Izzy. Could
mhm.
you, I want to ask about, can you elaborate why you chose busy Izzy?
I guess it's because I feel like I'm always busy with something or other, some sort of new goal or aspiration or on a in the physical world, very busy, and then also in the mental world, always, learning and growing and busy mentally, which is actually something I'm trying to improve, through meditation and all that kind of trying to invite more peace into my life and less busyness. But for as of right now, I am still busy, Izzy.
Well, I just want to thank you so much. I know you shared so much information and we'll be included those in our show notes. And we just want to say thank you again for being here and sharing your story and kind of opening up about your fear when you were younger and what you were working on and how you moved through it and the tools that you shared. And so we really appreciate you being with us today.
I thank you for having me and allowing me to have this platform to speak about this transformation that is ongoing. And yeah, I really do hope that it resonates with even just one person and that, they find some of the tools that I've found helpful to be helpful as well. So thank you for providing me the opportunity to speak on that.
To all of our listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of Transforming and Thriving. We'll be back every other Monday with more inspiring stories. Please follow us on your favorite podcast app and follow us on Instagram so you can be a part of this community and stay up to date with each episode. Feel free to leave a review so that we can get your valuable feedback and other people can find these powerful stories. We're all in this crazy life together, so let's move through it together. See you there.